PNW-ISA's ATC 20 Canopy Connections, Advancing Equity, Wellness, and Community in Arboriculture. Today's presentation is Soil, What It Is and How It Works, presented by James Cassidy. James has been an instructor of soil science at Oregon State University for over 15 years. His introductory class now has over 200 students each term and is incredibly popular. He is also the faculty advisor for the wildly popular OSU Organic Growers Club, OSU's student farm. Coming from a non-traditional background, he spent 35 plus years in the music industry. James is passionate about soil and is popular with students because of his dynamic speaking approach. The Student Farm Project has over 300 student volunteers on its listserv and continues to grow daily. The farm cultivates over 50 different fruit and vegetable crops and is just beginning its 20th season. Please join PNW-ISA in welcoming James Cassidy.
Yeah, my name is James Cassidy. I'm an instructor of soil science here at Oregon State University. And this is a lecture I'm going to give you all about soil, what it is and how it works. And I've got some demos and a couple of things I'm going to show you. And also some really cool, hope to, eventually we're going to get to some really cool online tools that I think that you will find useful. And there's so much cool stuff out there right now. So yeah, I've been teaching soils classes for about, this will be my 15th year. And now it's like COVID times and it's just kind of a different environment. So now I'm teaching on Zoom or this type of online format. And you know, I actually don't mind it. So we'll get right to it. So it's all about soil. You know, and I don't mean just like growing vegetables or trees and stuff. I mean everything. It's all about soil. I mean, every atom in your body. I mean, think about this. Everything you've ever seen or ever will see, all of this stuff came from this earth. And every atom inside of your body has been through the soil billions of times already. I mean, think about it. Inside of you right now you're just made out of the elements of the periodic table of elements. And where did that stuff come from? You know, think about that. What are you actually made out of? And what you're really made out of is dissolved rocks. There's a rock here. This is a piece of granite. And maybe you don't know this, but rocks dissolve in water. And that's what comes out of a rock are these things that we call nutrients, right? And nutrients are just dissolved elemental rock. And, you know, what is everything made of? I mean, think about it. Inside of you right now, there's a skeleton inside of you, right? That's holding you up, right? And that skeleton is made out of what, mostly, right? Calcium, right? And where did the calcium come from? It dissolved out of a rock, and then a plant took it up at its roots, and then it integrated that into the tissues of the plant, and then either you ate it, or your mom ate it, or you ate an animal that ate it, or your mom ate an animal that ate it, and then it got integrated into you. And that's what's in there. That's a tiny little pieces of calcium that were slowly dissolved out of rocks. And think about it. Every atom in your body, not just calcium, but the magnesium, the molybdenum, the copper, you know, little tiny bits of that stuff. They all have some sort of biological function. And you know, just on that scale, it's all about soil. Just your actual existence is about soil. But all of this stuff, I mean, everything you've ever seen and anything you ever will see, all of it came from the earth, and most of it came from the soil, and all of it, and I mean all of it, is going back to the soil sooner or later. And pretty soon, actually. as it turns out. I mean, it's almost over, folks. And I don't mean this lecture. I mean your life. This is it. You're going to go back into the soil sooner or later. I mean, everything in this room, this computer monitor, this projector back here, all this stuff, sooner or later, they're going to tear this building down, and they're going to put it in a big pile, and it's going to be go back to the earth. And it will all go back, and it'll all be recycled around. So it's almost over, folks. And I don't mean this lecture. I mean your life. And really what you are is really you're just a big bag of wet rocks. Most of the time, look, most of the time you're like soil. And then for this little brief moment, you're up here looking, hey, this is pretty good before you know it, before you can say it's pretty cool, it's over. And, you know, my goal here today, aside from teaching you a little bit about soil, is to change the way you see reality. And this is reality. Soil is reality. It all comes from soil. And the invention of agriculture, which was a human invention. You know, before agriculture, I don't know if you know when agriculture began, but, you know, you could debate that. 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years ago, you can push it back more, maybe, but still, what's 30,000 years on a planet that's 4.5 billion years old? I mean, it's, you know, this is a new idea. I mean, how far back do hominids go? You know, hundreds of thousands of years, somewhere in that range. Well, what's that in the scale of the age of the Earth? You know, we're barely even here. I mean, if you're lucky, you live 70, 80 years, right? And what's that in geologic time? Nothing. I mean, really, you're not even here. You're just like a moment, a ghost floating above the soil, and pretty soon, back to normal, soon enough. It's almost over, folks. And the fact that you are not soil at this moment is a temporary condition. And I would argue that you are soil right now. You are soil. You're a four-dimensional complex habitat, a self-organized natural body, a living thing. And all three of those definitions could be argued as to what soil is. It's a self-organized natural body, right? It's four-dimensional complex habitat. Fourth dimension being time. And it's a living thing. You could make that argument that soil itself is a living thing. Look, I happen to have some soil. Hang on a second. Right here, I've got some soil in a cup. And I've got all sorts of stuff to show you today, but here's some real soil. Soil, oh, you can see that there it is. Real soil, this is a red soil. You might see this kind of soil high at higher altitudes off of the valley floor, here in Oregon anyway. And I don't know if you know this, but a single pinch of soil, right here, there's a single pinch of soil. A single pinch of soil has over 1 billion living organisms in it right now. I'm going to repeat that. A single pinch of soil has over 1 billion living organisms in it, representing not just a billion of one kind of thing, but there are literally tens of thousands of different species inside of this pinch of soil right now. Inside of that pinch of soil, there's 10,000 species. Inside of this pinch of soil, there's over 1 billion living organisms and 10,000 species. And this pinch, and every pinch you will ever see ever again the rest of your life. Over 1 billion living organisms in a single pinch of soil. I dare you to remember that. I dare you to forget that. In fact, I challenge you today, by the time your head hits the pillow, before you go to sleep today, go outside and in a private moment, get down on your hands and knees and pick up a pinch of soil and just think about it and say, 1 billion. And just try to comprehend that. I mean, think how small they must be. I mean, that's the thing. They're so small, that for most of human history, we didn't even know they existed. And yet, everything is dependent on the biology of that soil. Not only do rocks dissolve in water and release nutrients, but nutrients for what? Mostly for them. And what do? They accumulate those nutrients into living organisms that do things. They process nitrogen and other elemental nutrients and small micromolecules and stuff like that. They create them, they make their own tissues, and they accumulate that nutrient into their tissues and the energy in it. And that is taken up by another organism, not by a plant, but really, it's all about plants. Because plants do something that nothing else can do. I mean, think about it. I said earlier that you have to eat plants to get those elements into your tissues, right? Well, how does that happen? Think about it. So we're going to kind of change gears just a little bit here. Think about what a plant is. What a plant is this organism that's mostly made out of an element that we haven't talked about yet today. Some of you probably know what that is. I think I have a plant here somewhere. Hang on a second. I got a plant. Here's some plants that I'm growing inside of this little bit of soil here. And this is, they're not looking so good. I haven't watered them in a while. But still, this is a pea plant. But think about it. What are these made out of? What are plants made out of? Now, this is important, so pay attention. What is a plant made out of? Well, plants, I don't know if you know this. Most people know this. Most people know, they take in carbon dioxide and they exhale oxygen. They don't actually breathe carbon dioxide. They eat it. Plants eat the atmosphere. Think about that. They eat the atmosphere. Of course, before the scientific revolution, people didn't know where they were in this stuff. They just assumed, who knows, they came up with all sorts of interesting ideas about where plants came from. But what is this plant made of? It's mostly made out of carbon. And the carbon comes from the atmosphere. And it's mostly made out of carbon. And then down in here, where the roots are, that's where the plant takes up the other elements that are dissolved out of the rocks. Or, look there's old dead plants in here too. And those dead plants are being biodegraded by the bacteria and the fungi that live, the billions in a single pitch live in here. And what they do is they dissolve, they decompose those organisms and release those nutrients again, from which this plant takes it up, right? So right in here, the whole thing is right in this little ant farm, right here, right now. This cycling of nutrients, and this carbon is coming from the atmosphere. Now think about this. When a plant takes in carbon dioxide is a compound, CO2. And it takes that apart, and then it puts it together into tissues, plant tissues, like leaves, or stems, or tree trunks, right? That's what a tree mostly is carbon from the atmosphere. And to take carbon dioxide, kind of in a not exactly correct way of thinking, a tree is essentially like compressed atmosphere, which isn't exactly right. And if you think how much carbon there is in a tree, and you can Google that and find out it's like tons of carbon, right, are in these trees. But in order for a plant to take apart carbon dioxide and then put it together into wood requires energy. And where does the energy come from in order to take apart carbon dioxide and then put it together according to the DNA instructions? Where does that energy come from? It comes from the sun. The sun shines down 93 million miles away. There's a ball of fire out floating in space that's giving UV radiation to this planet. That energy is coming from 93 million miles away. And plants plants have figured out a way to capture that energy and use it to build these tissues. And you probably have some idea, and you've studied this stuff probably, but photosynthesis is what that's called. We're using energy, photosynthesis, the energy from the sun, photo, to synthesize to make these tissues from the atmosphere. And to do that takes this energy. And as you might recall from biology, that what happens is a photon comes from 93 million miles away, and it excites this molecule and excites these electrons in such a way that they jump up to a higher orbital. You know, the incorrect sort of Bohr model in your mind right now, but it's, you know, it's a useful model. That jump, and when it drops back down, it releases energy, and that energy can be captured inside of a molecule called ATP. And then ATP can go anywhere in the body of the plant and be used to break apart carbon dioxide and then put together into wood. And it does that over and over, and pretty soon you got a tree. So pretty soon you got a sequoia tree. And here's the thing that I don't think most people quite grasp, is that inside of those carbon-to-carbon bonds, that is a tree, that is a plant, that's a pea, that's lettuce, that's a Brussels sprout. Inside of those carbon-to-carbon bonds is the energy of the sun that was captured at the time of photosynthesis. The energy of the sun is captured inside the carbon-to-carbon bonds at that time. And that energy is what's holding it together. That is the structure of wood. It's an amazing substance because it's very lightweight and very strong, because it has this incredible sort of structure that has the energy of the sun inside of it. So right in here, right now, is energy. And here, I'm going to show you a quick demo. This is where I started a little trash fire here. And by the way, this is my little teaching room that I have you at today. But we're going to go over to this little demonstration over here. I think it's this one. Yeah, right over here. So over here I am. And what I've got here is I have a piece of paper. And you know what paper is, right? I can back out of this a little bit. What paper is made out of wood. And so this was once a tree, right? And then it was cut down and chopped up. And then that tree was turned into, all that pulp was turned and rolled into this paper. But inside of this, right now, is the energy of the sun is in here. And you know that. You know how you know that? Because you can burn it. I mean, think about it. When you're sitting in front of you've all sat in front of a fire. Think about that. You're sitting in front of a fire, and what do you feel? You feel warmth. You feel energy. And where did that energy come from? Where did that energy come from? It came from the sun. That's captured inside of the carbon-to-carbon bonds. And that process by which a tree goes from gas into these tissues, right? That is photosynthesis, right? That is a reduction chemistry. You might remember a little bit about chemistry. There's redox reactions. This is a reduction chemistry. It gains electrons, right? Gain of electrons is reduction. And it gathers this energy. Inside of this right now is the energy of the sun. I'm going to show you a quick demonstration. I'm going to start a little trash fire right here. In fact, I'm going to zoom in on this just for fun. All right. So here I've got a match. Think about it. How does a match work? Well, here's a piece of wood that has a special substance on it. When it gets hot, though, how does it get hot? By friction. And so maybe you might remember this, but in order for a fire to start, you have to add energy. You have to overcome the activation energy necessary for the oxidation reaction called burning to happen. So you have to overcome the activation energy necessary for the oxidation reaction called burning to happen. And when that happens, the oxidation reaction releases heat. And that heat is enough heat to keep overcoming the oxidation, overcoming the activation energy necessary for that fire to keep going. It's a chain reaction. And I know the anticipation is probably killing you right now because I'm about to strike a match, okay? So we're gonna look at this up close. And I'm gonna add enough energy to this by using my muscles to get this match to start. Now the wood is burning because I overcame the activation energy. Now that wood is burning and I can light this wood on fire. And now we've got more, it's a chain reaction. And you can see, right? There's a fire in this building right now. Don't tell my boss. But look what's happening to it. I can feel the heat. Yow, I can feel the heat. And what is that? Where did that heat come from? Where did that energy come from? It came from the sun during photosynthesis, 93 million miles away. And look what's left over afterwards. Let's zoom in on this. We zoom in on this, and what is this? What is this stuff that's left over? That's ash. And what is ash? Ash are the dissolved minerals that were taken up. But look how little ash there really is in a sheet of paper. I crush this, and there's this tiny amount of ash left. I mean, think about it. Next time you're standing around a fire, and you notice you can just keep putting wood in the fire all night long, and then at the end of the night, when the fire's out, there's just a little bit of ash left. And these are the dissolved minerals that were dissolved from the rock and taken up by the plant. But the vast majority of the plant is carbon. And so what's released from this reaction, this is a chemical reaction called oxidation, is CO2. Look, it goes away. Have you ever noticed that wood just goes away? And where is it going to? It's going back to CO2. And there's a little bit of water vapor that comes off that you can't see. And then there's the heat, the energy is being produced, is being released. And then there's a little bit of ash left. So CO2, water vapor, heat, and ash is the leftovers after this oxidation reaction called burning happens. So think about that. I'm going to go over to the other camera. All right. So let's look at this ash on my fingers. You can see that. And where did that ash come from? It came from dissolved rocks. Now, so let's just do a quick demo here. Here's a rock. I have a whole bunch of rocks I can show you. Look at all these different rocks. Look at different rocks, right? They have different colors. They have different textures. And they have, they're made from, they're basically just different chemicals. And so different rocks have different nutrients in them. Like this one's really white in color. Look at this one, it's kind of got these pink crystals in there. I mean, these are eventually going to dissolve. I mean, sooner or later, these rocks right here on this tray are going to get in contact with water and they're going to dissolve. And all of these nutrients will be released at some point. So I'm going to show you right now, right in front of you, live, recorded live. Here's a dropper of water, and watch. I'm going to put a tiny little bit of water. You ready for this? We're going to watch water dissolve this rock. Watch. See that? Did you see that? A tiny little bit of water. Look at it. Right again, right again. And look at each droplet of water is dissolving this rock. Now you couldn't see it because it takes a long time. Actually, it doesn't take that long at all. It's just in the context of a human life, it seems like a long time that rocks dissolve. And most people never think about any of this, of course, right? And you know, if you don't believe me that rocks dissolve in water, look. here's just some table salt. So salt is one of the only minerals that we actually just eat directly. And look at this. I dare you to do this tonight or tomorrow or the next time you eat dinner. Is take a little bit of salt, right? Put a little salt in your hand. Some salt. And then just lick it. Completely dissolved. Salt is a mineral that dissolves very rapidly. And in fact, it's the fastest of all the minerals dissolved. And think about it. This little bit of salt right here, I'm going to dissolve some in some water right here, right in front of you. Put a little salt, a little water. I'm dissolving that salt right there. And now that's completely dissolved. And I'm just going to put it on the floor down here. And think about it. That little bit of salt is now on the floor and it's solubilized. And pretty soon somebody's going to mop this floor. And that little bit of salt is going to end up in the mop water. And then they're going to dump that mop water down the drain. And sooner or later, that's going to go through the Corvallis water treatment area center. And a little bit of that salt is going to be released to the Willamette River. Or if I just put a little bit of salt out on the ground, it's going to rain, and that water is going to dissolve the salt. It's going to move down into the soil, and it's going to rain again. It's going to go a little further and go a little further, and pretty soon that salt water is going to end up in the water table. And the water table is connected to the little creek, and the little creek is connected to the big creek, which is connected to the river, which is the little river is connected to the big river, which is connected to the Columbia River, which eventually flows into the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and that's why the oceans are salty. The first thing to dissolve out of a rock are the salts, right? First the salts dissolve out. Then the next thing dissolves out, the molybdenum, and the chromium, and the manganese, and the phosphorus, and the potassium, and the calcium. And all of it eventually dissolves out. And all of it eventually ends up in the ocean. And that's why there's life in the ocean. That's why there's sharks. Because the nutrients are dissolving off of the land and ending up in the ocean. And then a little bit of phytoplankton can take it up and into its tissues using the energy of the sun because it's a plant. And then the zooplankton can eat that, and the little crayfish can eat that, and then a fish can eat that, and pretty soon there's sharks. So the rocks are dissolving. And what soil is somewhere between all of the nutrients being locked up in a rock and dissolved out into the ocean in complete dissolution. Somewhere in between, right here in fact, is soil. Soil is partially dissolved rocks that have released some of the nutrients and that are being processed and biologically through plants that are driving. The whole thing is being driven by the energy of the sun. And that is all, and that's what food is. That's why you eat food 3 times a day if you're lucky. Because 3 times a day you need to replace the carbon. And you need the energy from the sun. I mean, think about it. Right now, in your body, right now, is a heart that's beating. And where does that energy come from that heart to keep beating? It came from the food that you ate, which came from the sun. You are an expression of sunlight energy. And you're just a big bag of wet rocks. And it's almost over. In fact, you are soil now. Think about that. I dare you to forget any of that. Think about that tonight when you're laying in bed and you're thinking, God, what was that talk about today? And think about that when you're eating a piece of pizza. And just realize it's all about soil. And this is where all the nutrients come from. And back to the soil is where all of it goes eventually. So, let's look at some slides for this talk. I have some slides. So here this is the name of this talk, soil, what it is and how it works. And I'll just start by saying, it's all about soil. It's all about soil. You get that now? You're probably starting to get this. And maybe you don't know this, but there are different kinds of soils. And this is something I think most people don't really think about at all. But there's a whole bunch. We've actually classified soils the same way as plants and animals. In fact, there's 12, I don't know if you know this, but there's 20,000 different named soils. Actually 22,000. It's always changing. In fact, there's new soils being found all the time and named. You might be thinking, what? There's different kinds of soil? Yeah, different kinds of soils in different parts of the planet. And in fact, we categorize them into what's called the soil orders. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but this will be helpful for helping you to start to realize all the stuff we just talked about. Here's where it starts to make sense. There are 12 different soils. Here's just 2 of the 12 soil orders. On the left side, you see something called an aridisol. Now, what do you think aridisol means? It means dry, right? Like an arid environment. And sol means soil. So this is a dry soil. And what you're looking at here in this image is what's called a profile view. So like if you were to dig a hole and then go look at the wall in that hole, or you're driving on the side of a road and you see a road cut, that's what this is, okay? And so what you see here is, look at the kinds of plants that live there. I mean, that's what you have to look like to live in an aridisol. And so now maybe you're starting to think, wow, so different soils, different climates, different kinds of plants live there. And that's why some plants live somewhere and not in other places. So look, here's this, right here, if you can follow this little cursor here, this is the soil. It's very thin. And most people don't realize this, but the soil is actually very thin in some places in the earth. I mean, most people think, oh, it just goes on forever. No, if you've ever dug a hole, you know it kind of changes as you go down. And in fact, were the earth the size of a big onion, the thickness of the soil is about the thickness of the thinnest little sheet of onion skin that you can peel off. You've all cut up an onion and noticed that tiny little thin 1 cell thick wall of that onion little layer. That's how thin the soil is, were the earth the size of an onion. So this is tiny. What the earth is a big rock. And that rock is dissolving in water at the surface. And so this is it right here. This is the soil. Looking at this image, I would say this is about 12 inches thick, the soil. So just maybe that thick. And this is where all the nutrients and all the energy and all the carbon and energy and nutrients are being cycled here. And these plants are struggling to make it. They're actually well adapted. They're not struggling at all. They just look that way to us. But you'll notice, I'll think about it. When it rains here, because it does rain here sometimes, this is not completely like devoid of receiving any precipitation. But when it rains here, I can tell you right now, soil is about 50% space. So half of soil, actually, I'm going to pull this out and just show you. Here's some soil right here. I happen to have some right here. This is a big chunk of soil. About half of this is space, and the other half is occupied by different size minerals in the size of sand, silt, and clay-sized minerals, okay? And then it's self-organized over time by plants living here and pushing it around and all that stuff, right? And so this is about 50% space. And so is this, right here on the left. So right here is about 50% space. So I can tell you that it rains about 6 inches a year in this image because 6 inches will fall on top of this, and that water will travel down 12 inches because half of it's occupied. That space is half occupied by sand, silt, and clay-sized particles. And think about it. What's happening. What's the first thing that dissolves out of a rock? Salts. And what do? They move down with the water, and then it gets down to about 12 inches, and it stops raining. And what has happened is the salts have dissolved in the water, and they've moved down about 12 inches, and then it dried out. And see this whole layer here? This is a salt layer. It doesn't rain enough here in this environment for the salt to ever get down to the water table, to ever get to the river, to ever get to the ocean. So the salts accumulate in what's called a BK horizon. There's A horizons, and there's B horizons, and there's C horizons. And this B horizon is a BK because it has carbonates in it. Carbonates spelled with a K, I guess. It's probably the Greek usage. But anyway, so there's your salt. And so now all the other nutrients are somewhere between this salt layer and up in here, and these plants are cycling it. And below here, this is just rock from here on down. So this is an aridisol, and it's governed, what this soil is determined by the climate, mostly, and also the kinds of rocks that are here. Different kinds of rocks release different kinds of nutrients that would have different plants living there. Now look over here on the right. Here on the right, we see something called a mollisol. And a mollisol, this is in feet, by the way. So here's 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot deep. This dark area up here, this, you know what makes it dark? Organic matter. You want to know what the answer is? Doesn't matter what the question is. Do you want to know what the answer is? The answer is add organic matter. And why is that? What is organic matter? Organic matter is carbon from the atmosphere and energy from the sun. That's what food is, right? And what this soil has is a lot of organic matter in its surface. And why is that? Because this is a grassland soil. So it rains enough here that the nutrients are mobilized enough that some of the salts can get down deep. You can see the little bit of salts down here. And then these are roots. Grass is a root that, but basically most of the plant that is a grass is underground. And what are roots made of? Carbon, energy, and nutrients. And they push down in there, and then the plant dies, and it biodegrades. And then they push down in there, and the plant dies, and then it biodegrades. And that keeps happening and happening and happening. And now there's a whole bunch of energy inside of this. And that makes the billions in a single pinch more active because they eat that carbon, energy, and nutrients. And so now there's much more biological activity in this soil than there is in this soil. And so it's processing a lot more carbon and energy and nutrients. And it's almost like, think about this. It's almost like we live in a giant solar system. You know what I mean? Like energy is coming from the sun, captured by photosynthesis into plants, and that is injecting by roots into the soil, or just the plant dies, and it dies, and all that energy is then all those billions in a single pinch, these ones right here, are you eating that carbon, energy, and nutrient just like you do every day. And the whole thing is being powered by the energy of the sun. And then, just like in that fire, eventually, just me moving my arm enough like this, pretty soon I'm going to get warm. And what's coming out of my mouth every time I exhale? I breathe in oxygen, and what am I exhaling? CO2. Breathe in oxygen, eat food, biodegrade it, exhale CO2, and water vapor, and what else? Heat. Just do that right now. Just breathe onto your hand. You feel that heat? That's the heat energy that was captured by carbon-to-carbon bonds of plants that lived in soil. And it's inside of you now because you're eating that food. So, now most people never think about this, but think about this. Look, there's a hole here, and there's a hole back here, okay? That's it. And there's a tube going through your body. And inside of your guts right now, are the same organisms that are inside the soil. So when you put food in your mouth, and what is food? Carbon, energy, and nutrients. Goes into your mouth and it's delivered. You chew it up and you increase the surface area of it and deliver those nutrients in the form of chewed up plants or animal flesh into your gut. And in there are the same types of bugs that are in this soil. And what do? You know what they do? They ooze on bugs, bacteria, and fungi. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but 80% of your body by dry weight was not constructed by human DNA, okay? Think about that. Mostly what your body is made out of is other organisms. You are a habitat, just like soil is a habitat, with a billion and a single pinch inside of you right now. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but like in your eyelashes, the base of your eyelashes are little nematodes that are living in there, okay? Maybe you don't want to think of this. Every hair follicle on your skin, if you look at it under a microscope, there's a critter living down in there that is actually eating the dead skin cells on your surface and then pooping on the surface of your skin. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, think what's going on inside of your shoes right now. Or think about, like, when you go to sleep at night, I mean, there's amoeba that live down in your gums that come up and eat the protein deposits off of your teeth. I mean, that's what's going on. You are a habitat and you're feeding it carbon and energy and nutrients in the form of food. You put that in your mouth, it goes down in here, inside of there, what a bug does is they ooze out enzymes. I don't know if you know what enzymes are, but they're just chemicals. And they're chemicals that dissolve organic matter. So they go out a little bit of enzymes and it dissolves the organic matter and then they suck up some of the nutrients. So they go and just like that. And then they take what they want. But a little, because they're eating their food outside of their bodies, they're dissolving the food that you ate. And some of that goes through the lining of your alimentary canal into your bloodstream. And then it's pumped to every cell in your body via the heart using the energy of the sun. And then those nutrients are feeding the individual cells that make up your body. I think that's what's going on. And then what happens is all that food, they feed all those microbes, and a huge bunch of those microbes, they reproduce and they become a lot of them. And then it goes to some other part of your gut. And in the other part of your gut, it's a different pH, a different salinity, different chemical environment under which those bugs start to die. And you know who's waiting for them? Another kind of bug that lives in that part of your gut that is happy to eat the dead bugs. And so they ooze out enzymes and go a little bit, and a little bit goes into your bloodstream. And that keeps happening for 34 feet until you get to the colon. And you know what it is then? It's called poop. And mostly what poop is dead microbes. They've taken that food and they've wrung out all of the carbon and energy and nutrients and fled that into your blood so that you can revitalize yourself and that your heart can beat and that you can think, so that the words that I'm saying with my mouth as I exhale by pushing my lungs and make noise out of my voice box and shape it with tongue into sounds that we've all agreed have meaning, and that is transferring to this microphone, and that microphone is going through however it's getting to you right now, coming out of a speaker, going into your ears and making chemical signals inside your brain that mean things, so that you can picture what a castle looks like in your mind right now, because I said the word castle. And that's all happening because of the energy of the sun. You are an expression of sunlight energy. And you're just a big bag of wet rocks. And it's like we live in a giant solar system. And this is really, really what's going on. This is it. 93 million miles away, there's a white big ball of fire that's giving UV radiation to this planet. Plants have figured out how to capture that energy and eat the atmosphere. And they can do that because the roots are in the soil that get the ash that are important parts of the molecules that allow for in fact, DNA itself is made from dissolved rocks. The information that's stored there is stored there because the way these chemicals fit together. It really is all about soil, not just trees, not just growing food, but reality. I mean, this is it. And everything else is a sideshow. Everything is derivative of that. And what you need to do is just humbly realize that and live your life in a way that is in accordance with that great truth. It's all about soil, right? Okay? So I'm going to go back to my slides now. And notice that this iridesol on the side is a much drier, saltier environment. So there's different kinds of microbes there and different kinds of plants there that some animals can eat and some can't. And that what determines the kinds of animals that live there. And the rocks they're dissolving are some sort of rock. Maybe they're one color, or maybe they have some nutrients more, like this rock has more nutrients of a certain important kind than this one. So it depends on what the rocks are made out of too. And there's mollisols. Mollisols, to mollify means to soften. And your molars soften food. That's what the term comes from. These are soft, cakey, chocolate cake soils. I mean, this is like, when a farmer looks at soil as like a mollisol, I mean, this is like agricultural corn or something. I mean, this is like the good stuff. And what this mollisol, what it looks like to somebody who knows the difference, it looks like money. It looks like civilization. It looks like prosperity. And it comes from a grassland soil. In fact, this country has more mollisols than any other country on the planet Earth. But let's look at this soil. Here's an iridesol. Look at this. Here's an inceptisol. So this is just 12 soil orders. You can Google it. Just look at the 12 soil orders sometime. You know, instead of checking your Facebook, or instead of checking your email, or instead of doing your job, why don't you just Google 12 soil orders and learn a little bit about where it all really comes from? Because this is what it's all about. Look at inceptisols. These are soils that are quite young. Either they're young, or they're dry, or they're cold, or they're made out of rocks that don't dissolve very easily. And so you end up with these soils that are kind of, a lot of it's rock. And look in between, you can see it's dark up in between here. So there's been plants living and dying and living and dying and living and dying here and accumulating organic matter and adding carbon and energy and nutrients, and the bugs are in here that are eating that stuff and releasing the nutrients for the next generation of plants. That's been happening a little bit. But if you wanted to farm this, you'd have to remove all these rocks first. And once you remove all these rocks, there's not much soil left. And between these iridosols and these inceptisols, that's like 1/3 of the Earth's ice-free surface are these kinds of soils. Neither of which are very good for growing important food crops. You can graze animals on this though, you know, and that's something to think about. I am not a vegan. I do eat a lot less meat than I used to, but I'm telling you, the vegan lifestyle, sometimes I don't really think people understand that 1/3 of the Earth's ice-free surface, you can't grow soybeans. But you can have animals grazing it. And animals are a super important part of this whole process. Because what does a cow do that eats this sagebrush? Or a wild animal it does? It eats it and turns it into poop, which has got a lot of bacteria in it, a lot of nutrients that are released, and it actually helps these plants grow. And so it helps build this ecosystem. And I won't get into it too much more. But so here, but let's look at the world's global soil regions. You can just Google this. You just Google global soil order map. But look at, so let's look at this map. And look where the mollisols are. In this schema, they're green. Look at this. Here's the big picture. Here's the big message here to think about. The United States has 21% of our land mass in the United States is mollisols, the most important agricultural soil on the planet. Formerly grasslands that have enormous stores of carbon and energy in them, and they're thick and they're deep. And they hold water. and they hold nutrients. And that's what all this agriculture is about. And the invention of agriculture 20,000 years ago or so, people used to follow the plants and used to follow the animals and the seasons, because that's what they were eating, was plants that were along the way, but mostly they were living off of animals that were migrating herds. And so that people followed the animals in migrating patterns in small groups called tribes. And they would move north and south depending on the time of year it was. And the invention of agriculture was probably a woman or a family that realized every time they came back to this one location, if they moved this crap out of the way a little bit, basically weeded it, there would be more of the thing that they wanted. And every time they came back on their nomadic annual cycle, they would come back and there'd be more of that resource. And pretty soon there was more food than they could carry with them. And they thought, what are we going to do? Just leave it here? And they said, no. Why don't we just stay here? And it's like, nobody's ever done that before. Well, let's try it. So they dug a hole in the ground, and they gathered all the grapes and everything they could, and they put it inside of clay pots, and they gathered all the grains and all the seeds, and they dried all the meat they could, and they tried to survive a winter. And they got to about middle of the winter, and they noticed that all the wine had transformed into some beverage that allowed them to live, and they got through the winter. And they said, this isn't so bad. And then the sun came back, and they cleared the stuff away, and more of the resources grew, and pretty soon they had surpluses. And that really is that's really kind of the outcome of the invention of agriculture, is surplus. Surplus carbon, energy, and nutrients in the form of plant tissues. And those can be fed to animals. And once you have surpluses, then everything changes. The other thing is they stayed in one place so they could accumulate. And everything changed once that happened. And that's not that long ago. And that invention allowed for probably the most important thing that happened, and that is specialization. Because before the advent of agriculture, everybody was in a tribe, and they were pretty much all kind of working toward the same goal, which was process. There's probably specialization, of course. But the kind of specialization that comes with surplus is completely different. You can become an astronaut because somebody else is growing the food. You can become a brain surgeon because somebody else is growing the food in surplus and is being processed and being transported because somebody invented transportation. Somebody invented refrigeration because they were all specialists. And that all came about because of the invention of agriculture. Now, we find ourselves in a global situation now where we have perhaps passed the carrying capacity of the planet because we have so much surplus. And that surplus is greater where their mollisols are. Okay? Because those are better soils for agriculture. They can capture more surplus energy from the sun, carbon from the atmosphere. And it preserves the nutrients because it's not so wet that the nutrients wash away to the ocean. They stay in the soil. And that's why the mollisols are in the Midwest. It rains there, but it doesn't rain so much that it washes the nutrients away. And it's cold and dry there, but not so cold and not so dry that plants can't grow. In fact, they can grow really well in the summer. And look where the mollisols are. 21% of the United States land mass is mollisol. Worldwide, 7%. Worldwide, the Earth, worldwide, 7% of the Earth's ice-free surface are mollisols. And that's really all you need to know about why you and I are sitting here on a Zoom meeting and we're talking about specialization and knowledge And that's why you are the specialist that you are. Because we live in a place that has more mollusols than any other place on the planet, except there's one other place on the planet that has almost as much mollusols as we do. Can you see that? Russia. That's right, Russia. What do you think the Cold War was all about? I mean, think about it. Soil is what allows for the surpluses to allow for the specialization for thermonuclear weapons. I mean, talk about power. It's all coming from the soil. They don't have thermonuclear weapons where they don't have mollusols, generally speaking. You know, unless you have alliances, right? And now look where the iridosols are. Here's where the iridosols are. These are all the troubled spots in the world. And why is that? Because the agriculture isn't as strong and the surpluses aren't there. And so people are just trying to live here, let alone become have the opportunities that we have because of mollusols. And you might think, oh, what about the tropics where these oxasols are? You see this kind of reddish pink in here? Kind of look up close. Sort of see that, right? So we've got these what are called oxasols. And what the deal is with these is it's so wet and it's so hot that most of the nutrients have dissolved away and washed out into the oceans. And you might be thinking, well, what about the tropics? I mean, aren't they like the jungles are there? No, the deal with the jungles and the tropics is that all of the nutrients are being conserved very, very tightly above the soil. That's why the tropics look the way they do. That's why the dense jungles are so dense. It's because the minute a leaf falls in the tropics, it's being ripped apart by an ant before it hits the ground. And before that ant goes to sleep, it's being eaten by an anteater. And at the end of the day, when that anteater takes a poop, it poops right on the root, right on the surface of the roots, like it's taken back up into the tree. And all of that is being cycled to the living biomass above the surface of the soil, because the soils in the tropics are actually very poor. They're actually mostly just rust. Yeah, that's the last thing to dissolve out of a rock. The last thing that is after it's dissolved is iron oxide. And if you've ever been to the tropics, and some of you probably have because you live in a place where there's more mollusols than any other place on the planet, so you've had the opportunity to fly in an airplane to the tropics, you probably noticed how red the soils are. And they're red because they have a lot of iron oxide in them, which is not great soil because that's not a nutrient, just iron oxide. And so that's the tragedy of cutting down the tropical rainforests, is they will never come back, ever. They will never come back because they took 300 million years for them to evolve in a place where the soils were slowly draining away all the nutrients into the ocean to become sharks. And look you can see the contiguousness between Africa and South America. As you know, they were once joined. I don't know if you know this, but it wasn't until the 1970s that we actually accepted plate tectonics as the dominant theory. This isn't really, people didn't know much about this. We do now. And we need to understand that the tropics are bad soils unless you're a jungle. And it's these kind of temperate regions. You'll see them down here, down in Argentina as well. And we see similar soils over in Australia. But these are the major food growing regions of the planet, or where it's not so hot and wet that all the nutrients wash away, and not so cold and dry that they're still stuck in the rocks. And that's what you see in the way high latitudes up here. You see what's called gelisols. Gelisols are frozen soils, and that's what defines them. And if you look, you'll see these little brown soils right here. Look at these little brown areas. These are actually what are called histosols, which are mostly peat bogs and almost exclusively organic matter. So have you ever bought a bag of soil mix for potting up a plant? This is where it comes from, which is a finite resource, by the way. Because up here, it's just warm enough that plants and mosses and stuff like that can grow, little plants, but it's cold enough and wet enough that they don't decompose. So they grow, they die, they don't decompose. They grow, they die, they don't decompose. They grow, they die, they don't decompose. And pretty soon you've got these giant, huge, 100-foot thick slabs of partially decomposed organic matter. And that's the type of soil called a histosol. Here's the sad and scary part, is that most of the gelisols that are frozen up here actually are histosols. They just happen to be frozen. Now, I don't know if you remember what happens to organic matter, but it goes back to CO2 when it is biodegraded. And for every increase in temperature of 10 degrees in a soil, a biological soil, there's a doubling of biological activity. And as these soils are warming up here, they're releasing more CO2 into the atmosphere, which is causing our climate to change. Whether you believe it or not, actually, as it turns out, it's happening. And so the great danger here is that people don't know enough about soil and how the world actually works to actually do anything about it. There are some people who know, but it's our job, once we understand this information, to actually get the word out. So I'm just saying, now it's up to you. It's your responsibility. You understand how the system works a little bit better than you did 35, 50 minutes ago. So I don't want to lay that on you, but here's the histosols, here's the gelisols. The gelisols are thawing, and the histosols are biodegrading and releasing CO2, water vapor, and heat because of the biota that live there. So study that sometime and see if you can understand why the conflicts that we have on this planet are happening where they are. And a lot of it has to do, really, what this is a map of is a map of political power. They who have the good soils have the dominant power over the planet. And they who have that power, who don't know that it comes from soil, should not be in control of this resource, okay? So think about that.